She was born with a crown on her head and died under the axe of her own blood relative. Mary Stuart wasn't insane, but her life was a slow descent into isolation, fear, and betrayal, as if both God and man conspired to crush her spirit piece by piece. She married a drunk, fell in love with a murderer, fled from the throne meant to be hers. By 25, Mary had lost everything: her crown, her freedom, even her son. Then, after 19 years locked away like a ghost in a cold stone chamber of Fotheringhay Castle, they built a wooden scaffold. One axe, two strikes. Her head fell to the floor, eyes still open, lips still whispering prayers. This wasn't just an execution, it was a final purge, a ritual sacrifice of a woman too dangerous to be left alive. The girl queen. A baby with a crown, a mother in a coffin. Mary didn't just inherit a throne, she inherited a death sentence dressed as destiny. December 8, 1542. Queen Mary of Scotland gives birth in the dead of winter. 6 days later, she's gone. Infection, cold, politics. The infant she leaves behind is crowned before she can speak her own name. Mary Stuart, Queen of Scots, at 6 days old. It sounds like a fairy tale. But Scotland is no fairy tale land. It's fractured, bleeding, torn between Catholic tradition and the rising flames of Protestant reform. A baby on the throne isn't just vulnerable, she's a loaded weapon. The English king, Henry VIII, wants the infant queen married to his son. Scottish lords argue, fight, betray, the cradle rocks, but outside sabers rattle, so they make a decision: if she stays in Scotland, she'll die. If she goes to England, she becomes a hostage. France is the only option. At just 5 years old, Mary is put on a ship, a stormy crossing to a foreign court. She never chooses, she never says goodbye. In France, she grows like a rose behind glass. French tutors, music, poetry, a future painted in gold leaf. Her laugh fills the royal gardens, but outside, people whisper in Latin and plot in wine-soaked chambers. At 16, she marries the Dauphin, the boy heir to France. At 17, she becomes Queen of France. For a moment, Mary has it all: 2 crowns, a young husband, the love of 2 nations, and then 1 cough, 1 fever, and Francis is gone. Dead at just 18, Mary is now a widow, a foreigner, a queen without a country. The French no longer need her. The Scots no longer know her. But the throne in Edinburgh waits, cold, cracked, and crawling with knives. So in 1561, Mary sails home, back across the sea, back to the country of her blood. But the Scotland she left as a child is no place for queens anymore. Return to chaos. She left Scotland as a girl of 5, veiled in silk, kissed by destiny, and carried off like a fragile gift. Now, over a decade later, Mary Stuart returns, not as a child, but as a widow, a queen, and a stranger. The year is 1561. The winds howl over the docks of Leith as her ship cuts through the grey waters. When she sets foot on Scottish soil again, the sky weeps, not in welcome, but in warning. What Mary doesn't yet know is that she is walking into a country that has outgrown her, or worse, one that never truly wanted her back. Scotland is bleeding, torn between the old gods of Rome and the firebrand reformers of Geneva, between noble clans at each other's throats, and hovering above it all, a distant cousin named Elizabeth sits on the English throne, watching like a cat near a birdcage. Mary returns with elegance, dressed in French finery, trailing perfumes, and speaking with the lilt of Versailles. But Scotland smells of ash, sweat, and steel. The nobles murmur, she's too French, too Catholic, too royal. Her half-brother James Stuart, who ruled in her absence, greets her with smiles, but his eyes flick to her crown like a man measuring its weight. In court, Mary tries to play peacemaker. She hosts dances, shows mercy, hears Protestant sermons, even as her own priests are heckled in the streets. Her presence is disarming, her charm magnetic, but charm cannot silence ambition or paranoia. The Protestants suspect she's plotting a Catholic revival. The Catholics whisper she's too soft. And Elizabeth, she never writes plainly, only in riddles, warnings, and polite threats. And then comes a twist of fate. A suitor, Henry Stuart, Lord Darnley, tall, handsome, with royal Tudor blood. A union with him could strengthen Mary's claim to the English throne, could finally give her an heir, could. But some deals with fate are written in venom. Mary sees a husband. But what she doesn't see is a mirror, a man as vain, impulsive, and ambitious as those who plotted behind her back. A man who will not save her, but open the gates to ruin. And yet, despite every red flag, she chooses him. The wedding bells echo not like triumph, but like a quiet scream too distant for her to hear, waits on the other side of that marriage. Love, lust, betrayal, murder, and the first cracks in Mary's crown becoming full-blown fractures. Love and scandal. At first glance, he was everything she needed. Henry Stuart, Lord Darnley, young, striking, noble blood running hot in his veins. He rode with confidence, danced with fire, and spoke the same language Mary longed to hear. Ambition, in him, Mary saw a partner. In truth, she was staring at a mirror with cracks she hadn't yet noticed. The nobles warned her. Elizabeth I hesitated. Even her advisors whispered caution. But Mary had grown tired of being a chess piece. For once, she wanted to choose her husband, her future, her legacy. She was 23, and she was tired of being alone. So in the summer of 1565, she married Darnley. And Scotland lit the fuse. At first, they glittered, young royals in a fractured court, smiling from balconies, raising goblets high. But behind closed doors, something festered. Darnley wasn't satisfied being the Queen's husband. He wanted to be king, not in name, but in power. When Mary refused to give him the crown matrimonial, his love soured into resentment. He drank, he sulked, he followed her like a shadow that grew darker by the day. Until finally he snapped. The breaking point came not in war, but at a dinner table. Mary was 6 months pregnant. Her closest confidant, David Rizzio, her Italian secretary, sat beside her, playing lute and whispering news from abroad. Suddenly the doors burst open. Darnley stormed in, not alone, but with masked men, swords drawn. They dragged Rizzio from the room, stabbed him 56 times, right there on the palace floor, beside a stunned and shaking queen. She didn't cry, she didn't scream, she survived. And when her child, James, future king of both Scotland and England, was born shortly after, she named him not for Darnley, but for a line of kings who ruled before the blood hit the floor. Mary pretended to forgive. She played the loyal wife, but something inside her had shattered that night. A few months later, Darnley was dead, found in the garden at Kirk O' Field. The house he was sleeping in had exploded. But his body wasn't burned. He had been strangled first. The message was clear. This wasn't an accident. This was theater. Fingers pointed in all directions, but one name rose above the rest. James Hepburn, Earl of Bothwell, a war hero, rough, commanding, and dangerously close to Mary. And then, in a move that shattered what little faith the people had left, Mary married him weeks after her husband's murder. Scandal exploded like cannon fire. Had she been seduced, manipulated, or was she complicit, a black widow in royal lace? The nobles no longer whispered, they marched, raising banners not against her husband, but against the Queen herself. And Mary, once adored, once untouchable, was now surrounded on all sides. Her crown, her safety, even her infant son, all slipping away. The civil war had begun, and what came next would not be royal scandal, it would be royal collapse. Civil war and imprisonment. She thought she had lost everything when Darnley died, but she was wrong. What came next would strip her of things far more brutal than a crown: loyalty, dignity, her own child. After marrying Bothwell, the man most believed had killed her husband, Mary stepped into a storm she couldn't control. Some claimed she'd been kidnapped, others whispered she desired it. Either way, the people of Scotland didn't see a queen in love. They saw a woman complicit in murder, and in a country ruled by nobles who could smell weakness like blood on snow, that was enough. The rebel lords rose fast. They called it justice. They called it defense of the realm, but it was a coup in royal dressing. Mary tried to fight back, not just with armies, but with speeches, with dignity. But the battles were short, the betrayals swift. Even men who once kissed her hand now turned their backs as her banners fell. At Carberry Hill, the showdown came. She stood on one side, the rebel lords on the other. Bothwell fled under cover of night. Mary surrendered alone. The nobles promised safety. Instead, they dragged her to Loch Leven Castle, a cold island prison surrounded by water as black as their intentions. She was only 24, newly married, recently widowed, recently crowned. Now a prisoner, there behind thick stone and thicker silence, they broke her again. They forced her to sign an abdication. Her infant son, James VI, was crowned without her. She wasn't even allowed to hold him one last time. Her crown passed to a baby. Her freedom passed to her enemies. She began to waste away. Her letters were filled with numbness, paranoia, aching. Some days she refused to eat. Other days she spoke of death as a release. But Mary Stuart wasn't dead yet, and queens don't fade quietly. In May of 1568, after nearly a year in confinement, she escaped. A loyal servant smuggled in a disguise. She crept past guards, crossed the freezing water, rode into the highlands with just a few riders and even fewer allies. But even free, she had nowhere to go. Her own country had rejected her. Her armies were scattered. Her name was no longer sacred, it was divisive. So she made a choice, one she would never be able to undo. She fled across the border, into England, to the court of her cousin, Elizabeth I. Perhaps she hoped for shelter, perhaps for diplomacy. But what she found was a prison without walls, waits behind that border, 19 years of captivity, not in chains, but in silence. And that silence would prove far more deadly. 19 years in a cage. She crossed into England not as a queen, but as a refugee with broken shoes and broken trust. Behind her, Scotland burned her memory. Ahead of her, Elizabeth I waited, with a smile sharpened like a dagger. Mary had hoped for sanctuary, but queens don't give sanctuary to rivals, especially not rivals with stronger blood claims to the English throne. So Elizabeth gave her something else, not dungeons, not execution, but something colder, a gilded cage. Mary was moved from one estate to another, castles, manors, countryside halls, no chains, no torture racks. But guards at every door, curtains that never opened, letters intercepted, prayers monitored. She lived in rooms with velvet chairs and stone walls, a queen of furniture, not of people. 19 years passed like slow poison. The seasons came and went, but her world stayed frozen. She embroidered, she wrote letters, she waited. Sometimes she was hopeful, sometimes she wept, sometimes she dreamed of escape, other times she dreamed of dying. But Mary still had something Elizabeth could never erase, her name. To English Catholics, Mary was not a prisoner, she was a beacon, the rightful queen, the Catholic phoenix waiting to rise. And in her name, plots began to bloom like rot beneath floorboards. Letters were passed, names gathered in secret. There were whispers of invasion, assassination, plans to kill Elizabeth and place Mary on the throne, but were they hers? Or planted by men who wanted a reason to see her gone? That's the twist history never truly untangled. In 1586, Elizabeth's spy chief, Sir Francis Walsingham, cracked a cipher. Hidden inside a beer barrel, letters smuggled in code, a message believed to be from Mary herself. The contents, acknowledgement of a plot, possibly her approval, a whisper that might as well have been a scream. Elizabeth had waited almost 2 decades. Now she had the excuse. A trial was ordered, a verdict already written. Mary would not leave this cage, she would only leave the world. And so we arrive, next part, where words turn into weapons, where the mask of nobility falls away, and a queen walks to the block. The trial and the axe. The room wasn't a courtroom, it was a stage. And Mary, after 19 years of silence, was finally handed a script that had already been written without her. In October of 1586, Mary was summoned before a council of nobles. No lawyer, no witnesses, just a list of charges and a crown that no longer protected her. They accused her of conspiracy, of sedition, of blessing the hands that planned to murder Elizabeth I. Mary denied it. She reminded them she was a sovereign queen, not a subject of English law. But it didn't matter. The verdict had already been carved in stone. They weren't there to listen, they were there to end it. Elizabeth hesitated. For weeks, she paced her chambers, not because of doubt, but fear. To kill a queen was to set fire to the rules of monarchy itself. If Mary could fall to the axe, who would be safe next? What if one day someone held the blade over Elizabeth's own neck and pointed to precedent? But pressure mounted. Parliament pushed. The Protestants raged. And across the Channel, Catholic Europe whispered threats. Elizabeth signed the death warrant, then buried it in paperwork as if hiding it might undo the ink. But justice, or vengeance, doesn't sleep long. On the cold morning of February 8, 1587, Mary Stuart was woken before dawn. She dressed carefully, crimson velvet, symbol of martyrdom, gold crucifix, final shield. Her hair pinned high, her lips steady, she knew what was coming. She had written her own last prayers the night before. letters to her family, her son, and to Elizabeth, who never replied. The walk to the scaffold was short, but the silence was eternal. Inside Fotheringhay Castle, they had draped the chamber in black. The scaffold was rough wood, stained from too many deaths. The executioner waited, face masked in cloth. Mary knelt, whispered her final words. "Into thy hands, O Lord, I commend my spirit." The axe fell and missed. The blade struck her shoulder. A groan escaped her lips, a gasp in the crowd. The executioner hesitated, then swung again, and again, 3 strikes to take her head. 3 failures to grant her dignity. When he held her head aloft, the crowd recoiled. Her wig slipped off. Her hair, short, grey, tumbled loose like a final betrayal. Even in death, they hadn't let her be queen. Blood pooled. The silence deepened. Some said the executioner muttered a prayer. Others said the dog, Mary's small terrier, ran from under her skirts, curled beside the body, and refused to move. But the truth is simpler. The room was colder after she died, and the people who had killed her left quickly, as if afraid her ghost might follow. But ghosts don't just follow. Sometimes they rise. We ask, was Mary, Queen of Scots, a traitor, or the first saint of a dying monarchy? A Catholic martyr or a threat? The axe had done its work. The body was removed, the blood scrubbed from the scaffold, but Mary Stuart did not vanish. She multiplied in paintings, in whispers, in churches, and in firelight. And in the minds of those who saw more than a queen, they saw a sacrifice. In England, the official line was swift. Justice had been served. A traitor was dead. The realm was safe. But safety is a fragile illusion. And death rarely ends a story, especially not this one. In France, in Spain, in Rome, Mary became a symbol, draped in martyr's crimson, crowned in suffering. The Catholic world wept not just for her death, but for what she represented. A queen who bled because she prayed the wrong way. Churches displayed her portrait. Monks sang prayers in her name. Priests lit candles not just for her soul, but for revenge. Elizabeth I knew the world was watching. And despite all her poise, something cracked. When word reached her that the execution had gone through, she reportedly locked herself in her chambers for days. Cried, screamed, blamed her ministers. Claimed the warrant had been carried out without her true consent. But the ink on that paper was hers, so was the silence that followed. In public, Elizabeth stood tall. In private, she had killed her cousin. A queen had destroyed another queen. And some said she never slept quite the same again. As for Mary, the woman stripped of power, home, and freedom, her shadow only grew. Her final act wasn't death, it was resurrection. When her son, James VI of Scotland, came to power after Elizabeth's death, he became James I of England, uniting the thrones his mother once lost. And the irony, he was raised Protestant by the very lords who destroyed her, but even they couldn't erase the bloodline. Mary's legacy now sat on the throne of her greatest rival. So who was she truly? A foolish romantic who let desire blind her, a political pawn with too much pride, a dangerous threat cloaked in piety, or a woman born to rule, but condemned by a world that feared women with power? The answers shift like mist. And maybe that's why she still haunts the silence. But this story doesn't stand alone. The crown has spilled darker blood, and many who wore it paid a heavier price. The echo of queens. She died on a scaffold, But Mary's true execution began long before the axe ever fell. In letters unread, in rooms locked, in choices denied, they called her a traitor, a seductress, a fool, a martyr. But in truth, she was something far more dangerous, a woman who refused to surrender her story, her blood soaked into wood, her name burned into legend, and long after kings have turned to dust, her shadow still walks the halls of power. And Mary, she wasn't the only one. The crown has always been heavier than gold. It crushes, it corrupts, and sometimes it kills. So if this tale has shaken something in you, don't stop here. There are other monarchs, other betrayals, other executions whispered through time. Step deeper into the dark. Discover what it really meant to rule. In the next story.